Hello and welcome to day 4 of the Waimea Rash Guard and Swim Bottom Sew Along. I'm Sharon Aguilar and I'm so glad that you're back. Today we're going to get started on the top. So grab everything you cut out earlier in the week to sew the top, and we'll go ahead and we'll get started. We're going to start with constructing the front and back as if you were doing the color blocking panels, but the same will apply even if you're just doing the solid. I'll tell you in the comments where to skip in the video, so if you want to skip that section you can. And also another thing that I really wanted to mention before getting started is I do use a sewing machine, a serger, a cover stitch. I have all these machines that I'm using to create my patterns, but you really only need your sewing machine. So don't feel intimidated if you do not have a plethora of machines. A lot of them are, I enjoy using them, but they're decorative sometimes more than they are functional. Don't tell my husband that though. So anyways, you'll just want to make sure that you use a stretch stitch on your machine and that your settings are right so that you're sewing for stretch fabric. When you top stitch, I just enjoy using a zigzag. Even though I have my cover stitch, sometimes I still will just top stitch really quickly with a zigzag on my regular machine because it's super quick. Is what I do on my zigzag is I change it usually to where the length and the width are both between 2.5 and 3 inches. That's just the zigzag I like to use for top stitching. You can also use the same zigzag when you're applying your elastic into your bottoms. So you'll just want to make sure that your settings are right. That's the more important thing on your machine. And don't feel machine envy if you don't have a serger or a cover stitch. On the rash guard, I made a few in testing that I didn't top stitch at all. I just didn't want to take the time to do that just in case something didn't fit right. I hadn't wasted all this time perfectly cover stitching every seam. That's something you really want to do after you have gotten your fit nailed down. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump in and let's get started. Thanks again for joining me. The first thing that I'm going to do on my rash guard is I'm going to do the dart. I like to just go ahead and have these darted so that whenever I'm ready to insert my sleeve that that's already done and I can just go ahead and put it in. So I'm going to fold this to where the right sides are together. I'm going to line it up to where the lines are on top of each other. I don't know if you are catching where I've marked it. And then I'm going to put some pins. Can't really use, I always prefer Wonder clips, but you really can't use Wonder clips when you're doing a dart because you want to, I go through and I put pins all along my seam line, and it makes it easy to make sure that I'm lining that line up because I can check that my pin went through the front and then went through the back. So sometimes I have to do it a few times to make sure that everything is lining up. So you're going to pin all along this and then check your back to make sure that your dart isn't off. And then after you have that pinned, you're going to get your sewing machine and you're going to sew right along where you have marked that line. So do you see how my pin went through on the top on that line, and then I made sure it went through on the bottom? Because if you don't make sure that, then your dart can be off. Like if you just fold it and then kind of guess, then you're going to have a wonky dart. So we're going to just sew. You can sew with a stretch stitch. With I did that on my first few suits, and I noticed it was kind of overkill. So I've just been using a straight stitch. And after I do a straight stitch on here, I'll trim my dart, and then I will fold it down and top stitch it. You don't trim darts whenever you're doing a woven fabric because then it's just going to fray, but your knit isn't going to fray. So it's kind of nice to remove the bulk. If you don't have to though, if you want to just leave it like that. And then after you've sewn it, you press it towards the back like this, and then you top stitch, either trimmed or not trimmed. It's kind of up to you. And then this is how it looks. It's really great to have the dart. It gives you shaping in that sleeve right here. That's really nice. It gives it more of a professional look. So let's head to the sewing machine and sew a straight stitch along where we have placed our pins. Okay, now that my dart has sewn, it looks like this from the right side and looks like this from the wrong side. And I am going to press the dart, well, not with an iron. I don't really like to iron swimsuit fabric. But I'm going to press it to the back, towards the back of the sleeve. You can either trim it or just leave it the way it is. I like to give it a good trim before I do that to reduce some of the bulk, but definitely not necessary. Then I'm going to top stitch it. I'm going to top stitch it from the right side or from the wrong side and just make sure my bobbin fabric or bobbin thread is thread that I like. That matches really nicely with my front. So here is what it looks like from the right side, and here's what it looks like from the wrong side. I'm going to do that to the other sleeve, and then now you are done with the dart. So we are working on our front. I am doing the color blocked front here. So if you are doing a straight front, then you can just skip ahead to where this part is already assembled if you want the solid front. But if you are doing a color blocked front, then you will need this top piece that looks like this, and then you will need the front middle piece that looks like this. And the first thing you're going to want to make sure you have done is mark the center point of your top, mark the center point of this one, as well as that you have marked the points along the pattern so that you can line it up. There should be one on each side and then one on the top. So the next thing we're going to do is get some clips or some pins, and we are going to clip as much as we can to make all of this even. That way you do not have uneven stretching. The first place I'm going to clip will be the top, and then the next place are going to be on the sides where this lines up. And now I'm going to stretch this to the bottom and line it up here. When you're lining up the bottom, you want to clip it with the 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then make sure your seam line is going to be even. So you're lining it up at the seam line, not at the edge of the fabric. So there will be kind of an overlap there. Okay, so now I'm going to go all along this and clip these to where it's going to be an even stretch. And one of the ways I do that is I'll hold it where these clips are, and then I'll stretch it out. So I'll lay it flat like this. And then you want to have it eased. So you don't want to have like all even in one spot and then just like this bunched all in one area. So you want to lay it to where the area that you're clipping between is flat, and then you can stretch it, or you can just lay it and mess with it like this until it's all laid evenly, and then clip that. Okay, so I have that area clipped. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side so that these are right sides together. Okay, so I have it clipped all along my sides. The only place I haven't clipped is the top. So now I'm going to clip all between these points. Okay, I have it all clipped, and now I am going to take this to my serger. You can use a stretch stitch on your regular sewing machine, or you can take it to your serger. You're going to sew all along here with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Take your time, don't overly stretch in one area. You're really wanting to ease it. It's not a stretching, it's just an easing between all of the points that you have done this. This part will be hard if you haven't really clipped and pinned a lot, just because you're gonna get off, but you will not get off if you have planned ahead of time. So anyways, we're gonna sew that, and then we'll either top stitch after that or just leave it the way it is. I'm getting ready to start sewing, and I wanted to talk to you about getting your settings right on your serger. So when you're sewing swimwear or any kind of athletic wear that fits with negative ease, meaning it's a tight garment that's fitting you very, very tight, you want to make sure that your seams are going to stretch as much as your fabric is going to stretch. So is what I always save scraps whenever I'm cutting out, and I'll just practice on some scraps. I'll sew a seam just the way I normally would, and I want to make sure my seam is balanced, and this is a really good and balanced seam. And then after I see that it's laying flat, meaning it's not like all wavy and wonky, I'll rip on it, I'll tug on it, and see if I can break it. And you see, I did it really easily on this one. You see how I already broke it? Which, this is important because if you're wearing a garment that has negative ease and you decide that you want to jump into the pool or you want to do a squat, or you want to do something that requires movement, you're going to have a busted seam. Even though it's a nice stretchy seam, it's not as stretchy as your garment is stretchy. So right now I'm using just regular maxi lock thread, but I'm going to go ahead and change out my loopers to stretch thread. So I'm a big fan of stretch thread just because when you're sewing a stretch garment, it gives you that little bit of extra oomph that you need for your seam to stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and change out my loopers. Your loopers are the ones on the right that are fed through the bottom. So the ones that aren't your needle, you can't really put stretch thread in your needles because it's you can see it's like thicker thread. So it's not gonna, you're gonna cry yourself trying to get that through your needle, the eye of the needle. I also use stretch needles. So make sure that whatever stretch needles work for your machine that you're using. On mine, I like to, whenever I'm changing thread, I try and tie it and then pull it through. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Thankfully, I have air threading on my looper, so if it doesn't, it's really not as big of a deal. So now I have only stretch thread in my loopers, and that's all threaded. The next thing I need to do is I usually have to lower my tension on the upper looper whenever I put stretch thread in. I think that's just specific for my machine. You're going to want to play with your looper tensions, either lowering them or raising them, just to get a balanced seam. And so now I'm going to sew same seam. See, it's nice and balanced. And I am going to stretch it. Look at that. No popping. So you're going to abuse it and play with it until it does not pop. So it's important for swimwear that you play with your settings on this exact fabric that you're using, and that you don't sew your garment until you are pretty confident that you're not going to have any wardrobe malfunctions or seams popping. So see how nicely that seam works. So now I'm ready to sew. So I'm going to sew the front of my top all along everywhere that I clipped. Okay, so now I have my front all sewn, and it just looks like this on the front and this on the back. And I am going to cover stitch the seams, all these down. And I'm going to put it to where the underside, the reverse side of the cover stitch is showing on the right side of the fabric. And top stitching is completely optional. I've made several of these without any top stitching, and that's fine. So don't feel like it's something that's necessary for the garment or something that you have to do. So when I top stitch it, I'm going to top stitch it to where I'm forcing the seams towards the outside, away from the middle of the fabric, and I'm going to lay it to where the wrong side is up. First, I practiced on several, and then I got one that I think I like the way it looks before starting. You also might, I think I'm going to start with leading off with this, just so that the first few steps look good. So practice your stitching on one. Okay, and then I'm going to have my main shirt. And I'm going to push these towards the outside. And I'm going to position it to where, so I have all 3 needles in, and I'm going to position it where the outside, the very right needle is stitching on just the very edge of this fabric. And that my left needle is stitching just to the left of that seam. I'll show you when I finish. I'm also going to try, so whenever you're on this part, this seam line is actually longer than the fabric right here. So I'm going to make sure that I'm not stretching it flat, because then otherwise the outside of, so I'm going to make sure I'm not stretching it whenever I sew over it, because otherwise you're going to have ripples on the right side of the fabric. Okay, so now I am finished with the front. So this is the pieced front, and I have my stitching done. So let me show you on the reversed cover stitch where I was sewing. So it's easy because I have my blue seam. So I made sure that my outermost needle was actually on this side of the seam and then barely getting this edge. So there's 3 needles going down, and it makes it to where you don't see that crease anywhere where the seam on the front of the shirt. It hides that crease completely. The crease where the fabric joins. So this is what you should have right now for the front. And now we're going to do the exact same thing on the back. On the back, we are going to get our 2 pieces. So you actually will have 3. You'll have a center back that looks like this. And then you are going to have your 2 side inserts. So you'll have one side insert that looks like this and one that looks like this. So you'll know which one goes to which because on the armpit area, the part that's taller will go to here to form. So whenever it's connected, you're going to have one seam right here like this. So you know you have it wrong if it's on the other side. Okay, so we are now going to flip that over, put them right sides together, and I'm going to clip just the way I did. So you're gonna have to take your time and put clips all along this edge. Now remember, we're doing the same thing that we did on the front in that we're matching up the seam line, which means you're gonna have a dog ear. You're gonna have like a little triangle hanging out because you wanna make sure that the point where these 2 cross is 3/8 inch away from the edge. So you're not matching up the edge of the fabric. If you match up the very edge of the fabric, let me show you, I'll put a clip there and show you what happens if you match it up by the edge. Then it's not going to be one smooth line on your side seam. So you wanna make sure that you're matching it up the correct way. And I hope that makes sense. Maybe I'll show you on the pattern pieces. Maybe that will give you a better, okay, so here are the pattern pieces. So if I put them right sides together, I'm doing it on the bottom. The bottom is where I noticed it the most, that it sticks out like a triangle. So do you see how I'm doing that? Because I'm wanting it to meet right here where the seam line is, not meet at the edge. Okay, I'm gonna clip both of these on, take them to the serger, sew them, and then take them over to the cover stitch and cover stitch with my needles on the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, so I have my shirt finished from the back. So the back piece of my shirt is sewn, and this is what it looks like. And now I'm gonna top stitch these down. And of course that's optional. You do not have to do that. And if you don't have the cover stitch, I probably wouldn't even worry with it or bother with it. And I am going to push these seams towards the inside. So on the other one, when I top stitched, I pushed them to the outside, but on this one, on this time, I'm going to be pushing them inside towards the center of the shirt. I like to put my left needle to where it's on the very edge of the seam, and then my right needle, I make sure it is overlapping. I'm kind of pulling it open, not all the way, just to where it's flat. I'm not like stretching it when I pull it open. I mean, I'm just flattening it. And then I'm keeping that right needle outside of the stitching. Okay, so at this point, you should have 2 sleeves that are mirror images, a front, whether it's color blocked or whether it's a solid front or it's cropped or any length, doesn't matter as long as it's the same length as the back. And then you should have a back, and the back can be color blocked or not as well. So the first thing we're gonna do is grab our front piece, and we're going to grab our sleeve. So on the sleeve, the back one, you've either made a mark on it, or if you didn't make a mark, you can tell whichever one is the back because it has the higher point. So whenever you lay it flat, this is the back. So this is the back curve of the sleeve, and this is the front curve of the sleeve. So I'm going to match up the front curve of the sleeve, right sides down, to the front of the shirt. I'm going to match up this seam line right here, put some clips in it. This one you don't have to clip like crazy because, as you can see, the shape matches really nicely. So you're not having to ease in curves and stuff like that. So I'll just put a few clips so that it stays together while I'm on my way to the machine. I get my other sleeve, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I have my sleeves on the front, and now I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to sew these right here with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I have put my sleeves on the front, and this is what it looks like. Whenever I cover stitched, reverse cover stitch these, I push the seam towards the sleeve. And that's what it looks like there, and that's what it looks like here. So now I'm going to grab my back piece. So I'm going to lay my back piece with the right side facing up, and then I'm going to line up the seam that goes on the back of the sleeve with the back of the pattern, and I'm going to do that on both sleeves. So you're putting right sides together like this. I'm going to get some clips. So this curve, can you see that? This curve is going to match this curve. And these are also easy to sew because it's pretty straight. You're not having to curve anything in. You're not having to ease anything in, I guess I should say. And then your front is just kind of out of the way, hanging out by itself. Now I am going to sew my back seam, 3/8 inch seam allowance with a stretch stitch. So it is starting to look like a shirt. This is what you should have now after you have attached your back sleeve, the back of your sleeve. This is the back. So now I'm going to turn it inside out like this, and I'm going to sew the side seam. So I'm going to line these up on both sides of the shirt. I'll show you one. I'm going to pin clip my underarm seam, and then clip where these go to meet together, and just clip all along here. And then we're going to go to our serger and sew it with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And this is true no matter which options you've chosen on the pattern.